One.
Aloha and welcome. This is a meeting of the Act 90 Working Group. My name is David Tarnas, co-chair, and my other co-chair is Senator Lorraine Inouye. And it is October 14th, 10 a.m., and we're meeting via video conference. And I want to welcome all the members of the working group from DLNR and from Department of Agriculture, and also our testifiers that are here today. We have our agenda before us. I think perhaps just out of courtesy, we should do a few introductions. So I'm David Tarnas, chair, and my vice chair, Patrick Bronco, Representative Pat Bronco is here as well. Senator Lorraine Inouye is here, and we may be joined by her vice chair, Senator Gil Keith Agaran, if he's able to. May I turn to you, Chair Case, to introduce the members from DLNR?
Yes, thank you, Suzanne Case, Chair of DLNR. We have also First Deputy Bob Masuda from the Land Division. We have Kevin Moore and Ian Hirakawa. And from Division of Forestry and Wildlife, we have Steve Bergfeld, Hawaii Island. And I think we have a couple of other people who will be joining. I don't see them on yet.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair Case. If I could turn to you, Deputy Director Atta, and introduce yourself and your team.
Thank you, Chair. Morris Atta, Deputy Director for the Department of Agriculture. I have Linda Morai, who is our Senior Property Manager, with me on the call.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome to you and to Linda. And we have some staff here as well, Brad Knowlton and Zoe Sims, and our IT staff here at the house, which are doing a great job, and we really appreciate it. And one more person, David Smith, has joined us from DOFA in DLNR. And welcome to the testifiers, and looking forward to hearing from you later in the agenda. If I may, we have two draft minutes that I would like to request for the working group to review and approve. We've circulated them with everyone. The August 16th minutes, there are some corrections that need to be made, which have been made, and we've circulated those. If you've had a chance to look at them, I'd like to move to approve. Could I actually get someone else to move to approve the August 16th minutes? Vice Chair Bronco, could I get you to do that?
Sure. Second.
So Vice Chair Bronco moved to approve August 16th.
Second.
And Senator Inouye second. Thank you very much. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approving the August 16th, 2021 minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
No, thank you very much. Okay, the August 23rd minutes were prepared. Just so I say, August 16th minutes were prepared by DLNR. Thank you very much for doing that. The August 23rd minutes were prepared by the Department of Agriculture. We've circulated those, haven't heard back any corrections from anyone, but let me offer that up. Could I ask for a motion to approve, Vice Chair Bronco?
I move to approve the August 23rd minutes.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
If all is the corrections are recognized, then I'll second.
Okay, and so DOA prepared these, and I'm hoping DLNR, we circulated them, hoping DLNR had looked at them.
Yeah, I apologize. I haven't had a chance to look at them yet.
Oh, we can table this then if DLNR prefers.
Yeah, if you don't mind. I mean, I just haven't. I think we just got them a couple days ago, and I'm sort of jamming, and I would like to look at them. I'm sure they're great.
That's fine with me. That's
okay,
fine with me.
we'll hold off on the August 23rd minutes until the next meeting. Thank you for that. And then the September 9th meetings are still being prepared by DLNR, and we will circulate those as soon as we get them for comment. Okay. Now let's move on. Our next order of business is to hear from the Hawaii Cattlemen's Council. They had requested a little bit extra time to give a presentation to us, and co-chair and I agreed. So let me now turn it over to Nicole Galasse of Hawaii Cattlemen's Council for your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Tarnas and Chair Inouye. Mahalo for the time to present on behalf of the Hawaii Cattlemen's Council, and also for everyone on this committee taking the time to address this issue. We're here because we agree with the legislators who put this into law in 2003. Ag should be managed by the Department of Ag, but there's
Excuse
still
me,
over.
excuse me, sorry, Nicole.
Yes.
Chair, it seems like I'm looking for her testimony. Did we get her
No,
testimony?
I don't have testimony I wrote in.
Oh, okay, all right. Just for the record, then I think we need to later on, Nicole, just send us your comments as well.
Okay, I can do that so it's in writing. Sure.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks, Nicole.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. And we would actually request a copy of the presentation that could serve as your testimony if you didn't want to write it up. It's up to you, but something.
We need it. Yeah, I think we need it in writing because, those who are doing the minutes need to make sure that we have something, they have something to look at. Thanks.
Sure. I can provide that. So we've been putting extensive effort into getting these lands transferred because it won't just benefit the leaseholder, it's going to benefit the state as a whole with the goals that the state needs to reach. Those who are leasing these lands are not coming at this with an entitled attitude. They're just asking to be transferred to the appropriate agency for agriculture so that they can be sure that they can continue to produce without the worry that their land will be taken and converted to another use. This stability, it's important for the whole state, not just that rancher's operation. It would mean that the land is sure to be actively managed. Brendan Baltazar, he was not able to make it today. He's working cattle, but he wants to echo these same sentiments that I'm about to present. And that's the reason why I'm here, actually, is because not all the ranchers can attend something like this. Brendan Baltazar specifically wanted me to relay that while his Kula lease was talked about in previous working group meetings about DLNR reforesting it, he actually does have another lease under DLNR in the Kaupo area with the same message. Transfer this lease to DOA under Act 90. So it's been 18 years. And while some lands have been transferred, is it really enough to say you fulfilled the intent of Act 90? To ensure the long-term productive use of public lands leased or available to be leased by the DLNR for agricultural purposes by allowing these lands to be transferred to and managed by the Department of Agriculture. Now we understand that there are a multitude of goals that the state needs to meet. That's why these leaseholders aren't coming at it with an entitled attitude. It's to make sure that they have the means to utilize this land in a way that meets our state's goals. They're working to put efforts into the land every day. And admittedly, the scale here is an oversimplified way to depict the need to balance priorities because the state has many goals to reach. It's not an easy job to balance what are seemingly competing goals, but I think we should recognize that some of these goals do overlap and we should capture those synergies to move us most efficiently towards these goals. This shouldn't be an us versus them situation. We're one state. We're working towards multiple goals over population, economy, physical environment, but land management should not be based on politics or dictated by someone's feelings. It should be looked at as how to best utilize and perpetuate the land for the community. We can't choose one goal and march towards it while ignoring the others. I don't think that it could be defined as success if we reforest the land, but then lose our food security. The reason Act 90 said that there would be benefit for the community if ag land was transferred to DOA is because they are the appropriate agency to manage for agriculture. We have this delineation of departments so that we can concentrate expertise. Both missions are important to Hawaii. Both should be pursued. But in the case of lands with active ag production, we advocate strongly for ag to be prioritized. In this way, we can make progress towards multiple goals while not harming food production. According to the DOA baseline studies, the number of acres in pasture in the state is declining. This takes us in the opposite direction of food sustainability and increasing local food production. On the other hand, there are currently 48% of Hawaii's lands in conservation, according to the Hawaii Data Book. Conservation is important, but it's a huge task. Almost half of Hawaii's land is in conservation, and those lands need management. We can't just let it sit named as conservation and not have the work done on it. Why are we considering converting lands in active agriculture for reforestation when there is still so much work to do on the land that is already zoned conservation? Why not let the pasture lands continue to produce? Bremer et al., they published an article in the Land Journal earlier this year. It was on maintaining the many societal benefits of rangelands, specifically in Hawaii. But in order to capture those benefits of carbon sequestration, soil health, open landscapes, we need to preserve ranchers' ability to produce. But back to the many goals. How do we prioritize them? Well, a prudent way to prioritize would be to put effort into what is getting you the most benefit, the highest value. There are limited resources and we want to get as much done as possible. I think we recognize that there are limited resources. But if done in the right order, that is to say, we prioritize things correctly, we can reach our goals faster. So in looking at transferring the land to Department of Ag, this would give high value to the lessee and to Hawaii's food security, but it requires low effort. That falls under do now. Changing the rules to give DLNR the ability to give the same lease terms as DOA, that's high effort. It'll also take time, making the leaseholders continue to wait for this effort to take place. And perhaps there's some value for some of the leases if DLNR gets this, but there's no value in it for the pasture leases because if these leases aren't transferred, they're still under a department that doesn't prioritize agriculture. That puts a scenario somewhere between do next and don't do. But in either case, transferring leases is what we should do now. What we're going for is efficiency, the ratio of useful work over the total energy expended. This could include ranches that both produce food and contribute to conservation. This could include letting active ag continue to produce as they have been because it's already in that mode. And this could include transferring the land to DOA rather than going through the arduous task of changing the rules for DLNR. But part of efficiency is making sure what you're putting effort into is effective, meaning that it's successful in producing a desired result. Let's take food production. Over the years, ranchers have been aiming to keep more cattle here for local consumption. And I would say positively that with the increase in capacity planned for both the Oahu and Pauilo processing facilities, we can expect ranchers to be able to fill more of that demand for local beef in the coming years. But they still need to be confident in their leases to convert their operations to more grass-finished beef. While the ranchers produce, they're also removing invasive species, improving roads, creating water systems, maintaining fences, improving soil health. So this would be an example of both efficient and effective in reaching our state's goals. Again, we're not against DLNR and what they're doing. We're just asking that they allow these leases that are in agriculture to be transferred to DOA where they can be sure that they can continue in ag production and that ag will be prioritized. Keeping these lands producing beef gives us a better chance at having access to food, especially high quality protein, if our supply chains are disrupted. We've seen that happen with COVID, and we need to take a look at making sure we actually have security in being able to feed our community. We want to see this continued upward trend in local cattle harvest, but this move does require long-term planning, and that's difficult if the lessee is under DLNR instead of DOA. Why? Because there needs to be stability in place. The stability is needed in order to fully capture that efficiency and effectiveness that is possible. Part of that stability comes in the form of knowing ag on the land can continue. regardless of personalities that come and go in leadership positions. There should be an order of operations when prioritizing and a clear map that is objective, not subjective, and based on politics. Yes, Act 90 states that both boards need to agree to the transfer. But it seems that we're allowing there to be stagnation just because we want to keep status quo. We advocate that there needs to be a reason for the disagreement, one based on objective reasonings, not politics. We're always proponents, of course, of being able to adapt along the way because that's really important for success. But I think the lessees should not fear that they won't be able to produce beef because of a certain administration or because of a certain makeup of a board. Lonnie Petrie submitted testimony to this effect, and I hope she'll be able to explain the thought process here in this session as well. It's something we've been talking about as a tool that would help both sides without having surprises in what's going to happen with your lease. Now, we've heard in previous working group meetings that DLNR and HDOA work well together, and I would hope that they could work well together to organize conservation efforts on ag lands that are under Department of Ag. When it comes to the proposal of giving DLNR the same lease-making abilities as DOA, that still doesn't change the fact that DLNR does not prioritize agriculture. They may get the ability to give the appropriate leases, but it doesn't mean that they're compelled to. So why should we leave an agricultural lease under a department that does not want to support ranching? Why spend time making workarounds and making these leaseholders wait when they can be transferred now and be confident they'll be able to continue to produce beef? Now, maintaining these lands and pasture doesn't diminish the forest that's already there. In fact, it could enhance it with a leaseholder on the ground for the long haul. We understand that DLNR wants to hold the line on the decline of forests, but these range lands are already in active production. If we take them out of production, it's difficult to get it back. And again, that's moving us in the opposite direction of food security. Again, we've seen the instability in the supply chain, but if these ranches continue what they're doing, they have the ability to feed our community even if ships stop coming. And I think that's really important to know. We'll still have the forest, the 48% of lands in conservation, but we're really strongly advocating that we do not chip away at active ag lands in order to add to that percentage on paper. Take care of that 48% and allow these ag leases to transfer to DOA as was intended under Act 90. Again, thank you so much for this time. The reason I wanted to present is because I just needed to get these thoughts out there for the ranches who aren't able to be on this at these meetings. These are the sentiments that they all share when they call and talk to me.
Thank you very much, Nicole. I appreciate that. In talking to a co-chair, we both agree to it'd be okay to bring up the other testifiers to provide testimony after this presentation, but I do want to provide an opportunity for any of the working group members to ask questions of Nicole Galasse at this point before we go to the other testifiers. Senator, did you have any questions of our testifier at this time?
Not at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, co-chair, Vice Chair Bronco, any questions on your side? Okay, over to DLNR, questions on your side?
Yeah, can I just made some notes here. And I just want to make sure we're clear on the record here. So Nicole referenced the 2003 law that she said stated that these lands should go over to DOA. Just a reminder, the law required consent of both boards. So it did anticipate working out these issues. On food stability, I would just remind everyone that I believe the majority of these ranchers export beef. So we are not in a situation where we are actually meeting the food stability goals. And we have obviously other state goals. The DLNR does prioritize agriculture. We have lots of land, as you know, in leases. We work with in various ways to support agriculture. ag leases, permits, invasive species, fire, all kinds of things. So we very much take part in pursuing this goal. These leases are stable already. You can't change a lease, so at least not in DLNR. So the lands that are in leases are not going to go anywhere. We obviously respect our legal obligations. So I just wanted to highlight those things. Thank you.
Appreciate that, Chair Case. Any questions of other members of DLNR? Otherwise,
Yeah, I have a question.
oh, I'll come back to you, Nicole, to give a response. But let's go ahead with Senator Inouye.
Okay, thank you. Chair Case, just a comment. You just mentioned that you can't do anything with those existing leases. So, so the issue seems like that's before us regarding some of the lessees is absolutely not true with what you're saying, because it seems like that's why we're here today, is that the DLNR is looking at retracting some of the lands away from the current leases.
Yeah.
So as an example,
Yeah.
you know, the Kapapala issue. So can you explain?
Okay, so Kapapala, so we do have flexibility theoretically with revocable permits, but not with leases. And
On the
leases,
revocables, okay.
yeah, and leases have a term. So at the end of the term, you know, it under DLNR, they go out to public auction again. So there are situations that cause anxiety in the future, and those are the ones where we want to be able to work with ranchers the same as Department of Ag. And I will let me just, and if people have more questions, I can address this. But again, Brendan Baltazar's lease is not an Act 90 lease. That lease was a 2006 lease that he entered into that provided back then the right to withdraw portions of the lease to anyone, because the seller was looking at potential subdivision. So that was already in place. We have not, neither the Jason Moniz lease. We did not. That's not an Act 90 lease. That's a Department of Transportation mitigation requirement. So it's not like we're out there trying to actively rip the lands out from under ranchers. We don't do that.
Oh, okay. So just refresh our memories again on the revocable permits. So how long can a revocable permit being placed before action is taken?
A revocable permit is 30 days at a time. They're given out a year at a time. They're revocable on 30 days notice, and they are renewed. They can be renewed annually indefinitely. And so every year the land board reviews all of the revocable permits. Some of them the permittees want to get out from under it. Some of them are converted to long-term leases. And it's reviewed every year at the land board.
So if there's a successful grazing operations by a lessee and the adjacent lands that's in revocable, why wouldn't, and if it's a pretty much a successful activity, and again, like you say, it goes to the board for actions. So why wouldn't a recommendation be looked at as to the performance of a rancher, of a lessee?
So a revocable permit, if under our current laws, if they want a long-term lease, it has to go out to public auction.
Yeah.
And some revocable permits, I mean, in some cases, either the lessee or the lessor wants flexibility, and everything is fine right now. And so why change? If you want to make a change, you know, people will look at what's the best use of that land. So it's sort of, you know, do you want to try to make a change or just leave things as is? And those have just been as is for a long time. Sometimes revocable permits can't be made into leases, like if they have a subdivision issue or they have to be surveyed, it's expensive to do that. So there are some impediments there to an easy conversion.
Yeah, just.
And of course,
for-
what
yeah.
we're looking for is the ability to, in a longer term disposition, incorporate multiple uses so that it's a cooperative agreement.
Yeah, but just to share with you, I've had comments made not only by ranchers, but people in the community who have been following this issue. Comments like, if the state is looking to increase its forestry reserve, Big Island has so much land. So why are we looking at a particular area where a lessee already has the revocable permit as well as leases on existing properties in its neighbor?
Yeah.
Why are we looking at, there's so much lands here. So why are we penalizing someone who has done such a great job and, continue your forestry, whether it's going north or east or west or wherever, but just comments that I've heard, throughout.
Right. And the answer is we aren't. We aren't doing that.
Yeah, but that's where we
there's
are
rumors,
today.
there's fears.
Yeah,
There's rumors, there's fears. And, in the longer term, we as a state need flexibility to determine what do we need to do, but we're not doing that. We are looking for opportunities that don't interfere with ranching, where we can make advances for reforestation. It's a big issue for climate change, but
Sure.
we don't have examples where we do not have examples that I know of where we are taking land away from ranchers that are Act 90 lands to do this work. We're looking for opportunities.
So you're saying that the revocable permit, as an example, I'll use at Capapala Ranch, is not part of Act 90?
Well, it is a parcel that is under review under Act 90, and we want it to stay in DLNR so that we can manage. It's good land. Those lands are good for grazing,
Exactly.
they're good for grazing, and they have good trees, remnant trees. There's lots of koa trees on there. We're afraid if we don't have the ability to manage it, that those koa trees could get cut down, and we'd like to preserve it as is. That's our long. We're in.
Yeah.
I've said this before. We're in it for the long haul.
Yeah, so if we, you're saying that the impacts of maintaining our koa trees. So if there's a law or regulation that would prohibit a landowner to do that, that would solve the problem, right?
Yes, it could, but let me say, our leases do prohibit cutting down trees.
Sure.
And sometimes that happens anyway. And sometimes there's plants that are very sensitive plants that grow up. You want to be able to put an enclosure around them. Maybe it's an endangered plant, or maybe it's,
Yeah.
a cluster of trees that could hopscotch for birds. Those are all the kinds of things that we want to make sure we're taking care of. Those are the multiple use things. They're not the job of the Department of Agriculture.
Well, yeah, thanks for that clarification, but it's a policing issue as well. So the agency has to do their job to make sure that the lessees, are in compliance. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the explanation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Morris, did you want to have any questions or comments?
Sure. Yeah, just a clarification. I got from the presentation that Nicole gave that, basically there's a sense or a desire to feel on the rancher's part to feel assured that they can continue their operations on a longer term basis. Nothing is permanent, and nothing is forever. And I wanted to bring home that point that under leases, either under DOA or DLNR. Portions of it or all of it could be withdrawn and taken back by the state for whatever purposes it deems a priority, a public interest priority, just with a statement made by the board declaring that there is a significant public interest involved. So I want to make that clear that, what we're talking about here are not permanent solutions. There will always be that option by the state to do what it believes to be the right thing to do for our environment, for our public interest. And that option is always available under any management. And DLNR ultimately holds the cards to that decision-making as the repository of fee title to state lands. So it seems like there's some confusion about permanency, and I just want to make that clear that is the case. And then that's the reason why the discussion, I believe, more appropriately should focus around, well, okay, given that can happen at any time, how do we deal with the shorter term management issues, which is what I think we're facing?
I agree, Morris, but I think the issue that faces us, and it's an issue that I personally feel coming from a neighbor island and the island with the most state lands, such as the Big Island. I think we also forget that we are historically the neighbor islands, and there's a lot of things that can be preserved. So when you have issues with, if you're looking at Oahu, and well, you can go east Oahu because there's no large activity of ranching there. When you look at the west, I mean, geographically, you need to consider what our island culture and activities are all about. So, I think that we have to remember Annapolis does not fit on all the islands. So just to kind of share that, because we are pretty much unique. Less population, lots of land, and where are we going to head towards the future with food sustainability as well? Okay, having said that, it's just a thought now that we're this, and I totally agree with you that state lands and the lease arrangements or whatever change of activity, if it's best for the community, is a topic of consideration as well for change. Just wanted to add that. Okay. All right. Sorry to belabor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Morris, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I totally agree with what you just said. And I guess the point that I was hoping, I guess, to make was that, what we're talking primarily are, exactly what you're talking about, considering all of these multiple important priorities, as well as the character and personality of the places that we're talking about. And all of that is important to be considered. And how we in government ordinarily handle that is through collaborative working arrangements, whatever form that collaborative arrangement takes. And, I want to emphasize that, DOA and DLNR have been working on many things in a collaborative manner, and that relationship has taken many different forms in how we achieve our respective very important public goals. And I think it's possible in this setting as well. And I think that's what, at least that's my perception of the direction that this group is trying to head in finding a collaborative solution that will work. And land management happens to be a significant focus because that's the focus of Act 90.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, Morris. Thank you, Co-Chair Inouye. Ms. Galasse, did you want to respond to any of those before we go on to the other testifiers?
Yeah, I appreciate it. So Chair Case, thank you for bringing up some of those points. I want to address a couple of them. The first one is I might not have been clear enough. In the beginning of my presentation, when I brought up Brendan, I was actually bringing that up to say that he does understand that, that lease in Kula is a different situation, but he also has a lease in Kaupo that he is advocating for the transfer of. And also Brendan is someone who would advocate for the transfer of ag lands to Department of Ag. So just an example of that. But I'm glad that you brought up the issue of ranchers sending calves to the mainland. I do respectfully, I say that I think it's false to say that ranchers who send calves to the mainland are not contributing to local food production. They are contributing to food production because we can't actually meet the full demand of Hawaii's beef demand with the local cattle that we have. There's always going to be the need to import beef from the mainland, both to meet the demand and also for people have preferences for grain-fed beef sometimes. That cow-calf operation here in Hawaii, our ability to do that year-round is actually really important to the mainland operations. But on top of that, a little bit more direct is that if these ranches aren't able to have that ability to diversify their portfolio and have the ability to send some of their calves to the mainland, they're not able to work towards having more grass-fed beef in Hawaii. We've done a survey. Most of the ranchers want to increase the amount of grass-fed beef they do. There's so many factors to that. The market, which there is the demand for now, which is great. There's the processing, which there was a dearth of, but we are hoping that that is going to increase, and that's a positive thing. And then there's the availability of land. Without them being able to do part of their operation cow-calf as they work towards going to 100% or a larger percent local grass-fed beef, they would be out of business. They need that ability. For example, one of the ranches that sent in testimony is SC Ranch. They noted that they have 85% of their operation in local grass-fed beef. The rest they send to the mainland. They stated in their testimony that they want to be 100% local grass-fed beef, but they're not going to do that if the business environment isn't right, if they don't have the confidence in their lease, if they're not able to plan out that 2 years. So that's just an example there. And I'm glad you brought it up because I think a lot of people don't understand that. And so I hope I explained that well enough. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nicole. Appreciate that. Okay, we have other testifiers that I'd like to move ahead and listen to, and I'll take them in alphabetical order. Brendan Balthazar was going to testify, but he is apparently unable to be here today. He's out working his cattle. So I refer the working group members to his written testimony. Next is Neil Hannes. Neil, are you on? Yes, Neil. Please introduce yourself and the floor is yours to give your testimony. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, my kako. It's good to see some very familiar faces in this Zoom meeting, and I'm really humbled to be asked by Suzanne to be a part of this. I want to say at the outset, I'm new to this discussion.
Aloha to you too.
I'm getting a little feedback. I'm not sure if somebody has a...
Senator Inouye, could I ask you to mute, and I'll do the same because we're getting a little bit of feedback.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
There you go. Thank you very much. I'm new to this discussion, so kalamai if I display some ignorance in my comments and testimony before you today. And frankly, I'm a little bit nervous because I've been retired in doing a consulting business for the last 6 years, and so I haven't been active at the legislature the way I used to be. So but this is an important issue. So when Suzanne asked me to be here with you today, it was important to say yes. Because these lands are really choice. These are really important lands, and they can play a very important role in all of our goals. After my brief participation, I'm kind of wondering why we're here. Because I think I was brought on to be, by the way, I'm with the Hawaii Conservation Alliance. I'm on this foundation board, but I can't say I'm speaking for the Conservation Alliance. I have a consulting company. I'm speaking for myself. I used to be with Kamehameha Schools, like my friend Peter Simmons over there, But I'm not speaking for Kamehameha Schools either. Just speaking of my experience that I garnered while at the schools. But I kind of wonder why we're here, because if I followed what I read in the paper, this has seemed like there's a lot of contentiousness about this issue, and I don't want to downplay how people feel about it and their livelihoods and their interests are affected by the decisions that you make. But when I hear Nicole embrace our many goals of the state, kind of across the spectrum, it seems like we're in agreement on where we want to go. The dispute is how we get there, and it can be really difficult making the shift from a status quo situation of vested interests to a new paradigm. And I suppose that's why I'm really here, is to present an analog. Sometimes when you're in the trenches of this, dealing with your leases and your lands and so forth that I don't know as well as you, it's sometimes good to look at an analog of another situation and how people handle it, so that you can kind of come back and see if that inspires or catalyzes some thought that helps you break through some of your own impasses that you may have. So that's why I'm here, is to share a little bit about how we approached this when we were managing 358,000 acres of very similar land at Kamehameha Schools. About half of that was agriculture, half of it was conservation. And there's a couple of big takeaways. And Representative Tarnas, I did submit written testimony rather late, so it might be en route to you if it's not already distributed to committee members.
We have not gotten it in time to distribute, but we will as soon as it's received. And so go ahead and say verbally what you'd like, and then we'll distribute your written testimony afterward. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. And I guess there's a couple of big takeaways. Number one, these lands have multiple values, and they can contribute in very meaningful ways across a broad value spectrum, and that managing them and utilizing them for a single value maximum. And for our case, it was always about maximizing economic returns, 20 or 30 years ago and before that. When we started, we needed to make a shift to really recognize those management of multiple values, and that required integrated management strategies, where we just didn't come at it with one discipline. And it's hard when you have a staff, of people with individual expertise and all passionate and very competent about what they do. Is the key is, how do you get them to work toward mutual goals, not just a singular goal? Nobody does it in a mean-spirited or for bad intent. But in order to optimize the returns and the impact on the returns from the assets and the impact on our society, it just required an integrated management strategy, and that was hard. So, like you, we set about having many goals and figure out, okay, how do we deploy the lands to these ends? And I have a PowerPoint, Chair, if I can share that, just to kind of walk through some of this. It'll help you.
Yeah, if IT could allow share screen for Mr. Hannes, that would be great. Okay, we see it. Go ahead.
Are you okay? I don't see it. let me maximize this. Is it maximized on your screen?
We see 6 different images. KS manages ag and conservation lands as a sustainable assets class.
Yeah, let me get to the part. Okay, so that was the embrace. I mean, we were for years we managed in a very functional way at Kamehameha Schools, and looked at our ag separately and conservation separately, and really didn't spend much money on any of that because we were just trying to maximize our economic returns. And it was really our stakeholders across the state, and I don't just mean Hawaiian stakeholders, I mean lessees as well as the larger society who are influenced and impacted by our lands, said, you've got to do better. I mean, we live in a day and age where these lands determine how our communities can thrive or not. And so they pushed us toward this more robust model of management, that we were to really look at the land assets from the standpoint of optimizing generating an optimal balance of economic, educational, environmental, cultural, and community benefits. Not the easiest thing to do, and we then translated that to what it meant on the land. Is that meant we needed to care for our natural resources, our water resources. We needed to work toward a sustainable food system and contribute there. We needed to help generate renewable energy. We need to provide opportunities for rural economic development and stakeholder engagement. We were not set up to do that. We were not even staffed to do that. So, because we had people who were administering and good at administering the old system. And so the challenge became how we made the transition. Next slide. There we go. So we did some planning, and we brought all our teams together in multidisciplinary plans. So it wasn't just the ag guys doing the ag plan or the cultural guys doing the cultural plan. We tried to cross-pollinate these committees so that we could come up with a statewide agricultural plan, a statewide cultural resource management plan, natural resource management plan, how we're going to engage people on the land in education. And what's not shown here is a water resources plan that were developed by kind of cross-disciplinary teams. Peter remembers these quite well, I'm sure. And then we look back from the plans to say, how does this impact the lands? And I guess that second point I meant to make a few minutes ago is land use designation is really a crude tool to know what's good for conservation and what's good for ag. I think people did what they did when they set these designations in place, but there's some really good land that needs to be put into agriculture, need to be put back into conservation that's designated agriculture. And there's some lands that are really not good for agriculture that we're trying to make a living out of. And so part of this was to then not only look at our plans and the outcomes of our plans and see how we deploy our assets to achieve our goals, but also look at what the land was telling us. What does it want to be? Because some of these lands, I mean, it's kind of horrific today to read some of the old lease documents with our current values, but we demanded that the lessee chain drag a forest and rid it. And the language was weed it. Pukeave and Iliahi and all this understory that we would consider now vai very rich. We were trying to monetize the asset, and so we wanted grass or we wanted something else in its place. So we took really good forests and we made them something else. And so in this day and age, as we see our diminishing forests and declining forests, and we see the impacts on watershed, sometimes we want to expand that in other places. But at the same time, we want agricultural outcomes. We want to restore a local food system. So this was the push and pull that we had, and just looking at land use designation didn't get us there. And so we would look at the land and said, okay, how much total land do we have, and where did we feel we had better conservation values, and where did we feel we had low agricultural potential, and where did we feel we have high agricultural potential? We wanted to really let the land tell us what it needs to be and where it can make its maximum contribution. Then secondly, we overlaid onto that, let's see, I think I missed a slide, yeah. Okay, a study of value chains. We said, it's not just our farmers who are doing this, our ranchers, who really can determine the fate of their commodity. It's really the whole value chain. And so we're land managers. We didn't know much about the whole value chain of food systems, so it required an education to kind of look at all these issues. And then we said, where can we lean in? The slide I'm looking for, I was trying to pare this down, was the other thing we looked at was, let me see if I missed it here just in discussion. Oh, this is the slide I was looking for that I missed. Like you, and I heard Chair Case, Suzanne Case, talk about the honoring of encumbrances. We honored our agreements. So we had to recognize that in some cases where we had long-term agreements, we weren't going to go in and disrupt that. But in other cases where we had lands coming up for renewals, or were terminating, or were on holdover agreements, those were the ones that were the low-hanging fruit that we could really lean into to see if we could reposition them for where they needed to be to optimize their contribution to our goals. And so then we study the value chain, say, what can we do here? And what can a landowner do? We're not the operator, we're not the rancher, we're not the farmer. What's the situation? Where's the opportunity? And which of these opportunities are things that we can resolve from a land ownership standpoint? And so we try to identify those things. And then we looked at all of our lands and across our different regions. We organized our lands into regions, and we applied all these databases, in terms of how much land is there, how much is prime for ag, how much is available in the near term, and which of it is appropriate for various kinds of crops and commodities. And then from there, we set some goals. We said, okay, we want to do 10 things. We want to increase production of local market. We want to supply locally grown products to our own schools. We want to restore and revitalize traditional agriculture. That's important to us. We want to support ag education. We want to actively engage in ag marketing to build that value chain for our producers. We want to strategically invest in support facilities and infrastructure so that our farmers we have the land to do it, and where we have the land to do it. Some cases we need to invest in research and development, and we need better decision-making tools for ourselves. And then we needed to contribute to a sustainable clean energy future, and we need to steward forests and services and resources. That sounds just like you guys. That sounds like the state of Hawaii and all its myriad goals kind of across the spectrum. So we had to try and bring it down in regional plans so the rubber met the road. And so you can see in this one snippet of example of Hamakua, we have pasture goals there. We have things that we want to put into pasture that's not in pasture. We want things that are in pasture that we want to make forest. We have things where we have some other use and we want to have traditional ag, all based on what the land would tell us and to optimize our multiple goals. And at the end of the day, I think we felt like we would be producing compelling benefits for all of Hawaii with respect to the various commodities that you see there and the various other kinds of goals like energy generation and rural employment. And we felt like we were achieving that mission that we had set up for ourselves to generate an optimal balance of returns. That where we had cultural resources, I don't care what the lease was before, but it was our duty now to honor and to do what we could to protect those resources, to perpetuate our culture. Where we had economic opportunities that aligned, we needed to make investment and put our money there or induce lessee investments so that they could operate over longer terms. And I totally get the comment made earlier that hard for anybody in ag to make a long-term investment in infrastructure when you have a short-term agreement.
Thank you. Thank you.
So,
Neil, can I ask you to wrap up? That'd be very kind of you.
This is the last slide. And so across the board, we kind of looked at these metrics and decided what it is, how do we deploy our assets to best achieve these goals? And as I said, the credit goes to our stakeholders for pushing us onto this path. And when I look at the assets that you have, and I think about the goals that I've seen the state have, you just have such an opportunity. And if we can kind of get out of our own swim lanes and collectively sort, as I believe you are doing in this working group, you can figure out how to deploy those assets to and to administer with. And you have too few staff. Your resources are stretched so thin, But I think there's ways to do this to really help those assets contribute to Hawaii's well-being.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We can stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Neil Hannes. I appreciate that. If it's okay with members, I'd like to go ahead for the other testifiers, and then we can have discussion afterward. Next, Lonnie Petrie from Kapapala Ranch. Lonnie, the floor is yours. And I think Lonnie also will want to share screen, so I would like to approve that if you could, if IT could provide that for her. But go ahead, Lonnie.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I just wanted to offer some different thought process, but it tags along with what Neil just said. Let me see if I can.
If I may ask, Neil, could you mute yourself? That way we don't get the background noise. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. Okay, we see your screen, so just pull up your slide and it'll be all set.
Yeah, well, that's the hard part. I didn't practice this. You know what? Just go ahead and turn that off. I'll just talk.
Okay. You can just stop sharing, and you can go ahead and just go ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Lonnie.
It's in your written testimony. I sent a decision-making chart. I have brought it up numerous times about holistic resource management. I am not a certified instructor, but I am a student. And we use this, this decision-making model that you all have a copy of, which I was trying to put on my screen. But it's okay. I think a lot of the previous speakers have said kind of what I'm going to say, that by using decision models, and I present this one as a for instance, we can hone in on a process that starts with a landscape goal, a quality of life. And in that quality of life, we have ecosystem foundation blocks that support whether a koa forest is really something that can be managed here or not. I just, like I say, I am a student of holistic management, not a teacher. But when we start by talking about there's so much land on the Big Island, there's so much conservation land, there's so much land in Ka'u. I actually right now have the USGS lava flow map spread out on my living room floor. And you're talking about very, very, very small areas that can be managed for certain things. And I just want to take this moment, and I'll be real brief. I want to take the koa, I think it's the canoe area now, and I want to run it through this decision-making tool. It's just a tool from pre-European time to European. I have four examples, okay? And I would be happy to put together a PowerPoint that is more along the lines of what Neil Hannes just did, but in the essence of time, let me just go through where the quality of life's the beginning foundation goal in each of these segments was at. So 200 to 300 years ago, quality of life, the ali'i needed feathers for capes, for decorative adornment. The word kapapala itself is the enclosure of the pala plant. Pala was the sticky plant that was used to catch the birds. So 200 to 300 years ago, this 1,250 acres, let's build context around this one little spot, was used for gathering feathers and for logs, for canoes. So if you kind of glance back at your chart that I sent to you and I can't put on my screen, you have your ecosystem foundation blocks of plant succession, water cycle, mineral cycle, and energy flow. Well, those blocks were all there to support harvesting koa logs and collecting birds. These areas were 8,000 to 9,000 years old, based on USGS maps. If you go to the next row under the ecosystem foundation blocks, what tools did the Hawaiians have? Well, they had technology to harvest these canoes and lots of labor. The animal impact wasn't four-legged animal, it was human impact. Removing a koa log and getting it to water certainly underscored and removed a lot of the understory, but it also enhance the energy flow by allowing more light and more of the koa seedlings to regenerate. The guidelines for testing, that'd be the next row. The guidelines, the Konahiki probably used for testing is the koa forest regenerating itself. The guideline of wealth, do we have enough fishing canoes that our population can grow because our food is growing? So that's 200 to 300 years ago. So let's fast forward. Same 1,250 acres, okay? Keep the context right there. Post-European contact, let's talk about the last 100 to 200 years ago. What's the quality of life? The kingdom needs goods for trade. We are not a sustenance society anymore. We need to be able to trade. There's a growing population. This is the first block, the quality of life, production, and landscape description of my model, of the HRM model. Okay, so the quality of life has shifted now that we have a demand for food and a demand for the kingdom to be able to trade. King issues leases for ranching. Then go to that next row, you got ecosystem blocks. Again, very good for supporting livestock. There's plant succession, water cycle, mineral cycle, energy flow. Now remember, 200 years ago, we didn't have pipes and redwood tanks. I can see that this would be very, very important because of the water cycle, that the ranches would have moved animals towards more of our rainforests, which in today's terms we don't want. But in those days, going back to the quality of life, it was necessary. Next to the next row, we're looking at tools, grazing, cross fencing. Animal impact increases the energy flow because the sun's getting to the ground. Again, this is supporting the quality of life of 100 to 200 years ago. Okay, let's fast forward. Hang on, let me finish on one in this era, is that technology is changing and water is improving. The water tunnels that the sugar companies built is starting to provide water. Livestock, their natural habitat is in a savanna, not in a rainforest. So as technology improved, ranches were able to pipe water further out to natural habitat, more natural habitat. And areas like this 1,250 acres, it's now the Koa Canoe area, were less and less important. Although leases and expired leases tended to not allow ranchers to continue to do much to keep cattle out of those areas, which is still the case. Okay, so now.
Thank you. I'm sorry, you've got more to go?
No, that's fine.
No,
I do. Just let me.
Please,
Okay.
please, go ahead.
Okay, so 1990, we're still looking at the same area. Okay, what is our quality of life? We are now in an affluent society. People have excess money. They're not worried about starving like they were in pre-European times. They're not worried about trading. We have a fairly stable economy. So the demand for this area is not so important to the ranch. It makes sense when Dofa approached my father to turn it into a regenerative koa forest. It was all thumbs up. Everybody was happy. What needed to happen when you look at your ecosystem foundation blocks? Yeah, well, Neil, that area wasn't chain dragged to the best of my knowledge, but plant succession needed help to regenerate that forest. Go to the next line, tools. What are the tools? Grazing, we removed the grazing, take them out. we know that if you want a forest, especially a forest that has leguminous trees to thrive, you must remove grazing animals. That happened. And here we are today, 30 years later, and there's really no active productive management of the area. But what's happening to the ecosystem foundation blocks? Well, the water cycle, mineral cycle, energy, they're kind of staying the same, but the succession, plant succession is not. And I was very disturbed when I heard the findings of Forest Solutions, who's just done a forest inventory survey of that 1,250 acres, that there's now banana polka in the area. So where I'm going with this is, it's just tagging on what Neil said, but I'm not Kamehameha Schools. I don't have the resources, but what I'm proposing is decision-making models that are out there and they're being used. And to finalize what I'm saying is that we had showed DOFA alternative sites for planting koa. We are willing to take 7,000 acres of the top of the ranch that has the last two remaining 8,000 to 9,000 year old soils for reforestation. And we would be happy to see that removed for their purposes. And while that area below the 7,000 acres that, as Peters calls it, not top tier conservation lands, can be used for agriculture and transferred to the Department of Agriculture. I see it as a win-win. That's all I have to say.
Thank you very much, Lonnie. I really appreciate it. And I commend the working group to your written testimony. And if we have questions, we'll follow up with you with that decision-making model. Thank you very much. Next, we have Peter Simmons. Peter, the floor is yours.
Aloha, everyone. Seems like I know everyone there. And Emma, I don't know if you remember my son, Joshua. I'm sure he'd say hello to you if you were around. There's just so much wisdom in this group. And we've focused so much on, whose desk drawer this portfolio of leases is going to go into and hopefully never have to be looked at because at least would work so well. Putting the emphasis on, okay, so what really, really can help us in the short term is to concentrate on what's best for the land. As Neil and everyone else has said, we all have our own opinions about how that pushes and pulls. But certainly, and I mean, Neil touched on it, a short-term agreement on a long-term project is not the wisest way to go. And I think probably I'm imagining that DLNR recognizes that and would prefer to have longer term agreements too. The environmental services that were provided by the ranchers when cattle were wild was to tame the cattle. That's what it was about. So in the early days, you had wild cattle. And no one is suggesting that wild cattle is a good thing for the rancher today or any forest that I'm aware of. It's the management issue. It's how well do we manage the cattle? How well do we manage the tree farm? How well do we manage the orchard, et cetera? But one thing I think has been missing in this conversation, and Neil, I don't know, you're probably aware of this, but I was not aware of this when I was working for Kamehameha Schools. It was only about a year and a half ago that I read the environmental assessment having to do with strawberry guava and the release of the Brazilian scale. And it was then that I looked at the lands more carefully. And instead of referring to them as we have, and as I always did, oh, it's 48% conservation. Well, 1.1 million acres of that conservation is designated resource conservation. 1.1 million acres of that low elevation Ohia koa forest designated as resource conservation, not P, protected conservation. And the two things that are allowed, identified as what you should do with those lands, one of them is recreation. That's pretty cool. And the other is commercial forestry. So I never accounted for that. I wish I had, and I don't think many of us do. The idea of growing forestry as a commercial enterprise in Hawaii back in the old days, back in pre-1974 or so, really had to do with those conservation R lands. Okay, so what does that have to do with these leases? Well, those conservation R lands were really a blended use too. They were anticipated as multiple use, and good for them, but they have fallen into really tough times. And that's my point. I always testified in favor of whatever DLNR and DOFA thought was best. I didn't want to interfere with the wisdom of their management. I've always respected the people that I've known. And it wasn't easy for me to come in and speak up after being retired and actually have to try to re-educate myself about topics that I was less than familiar. But folks, we're being overrun. You know, to me, looking at the lower end of our forest that goes up into the pristine forest, the lower parts are being eaten. I mean, I've made a list. I'm not making that list to make anybody feel bad. I don't think we have the resources to do it. And that's what I'm kind of so disappointed and upset about, that I was so ignorant of and couldn't help. At least I can call attention to the underfunding of DOFA. And this isn't new. I mean, I hope, and no one in DOFA is saying, oh no, we've got lots of money. We were kidding you for all those years. No. There's a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done, and they don't have all the money to do it. It's all about management. So the idea of going into greater enterprise, newer enterprises, to do good deeds, to do things that we all, just like we said, timing, how it's done, all that stuff. But we're losing a lot. We just can't afford. We don't have that much land. 1.1 million acres is being demised by strawberry guava. I'm not going into the other weeds, but you know what they are. That's 2 Oahu's. And it's not all, you know, cheek by jowl strawberry guava. Only about a third of it is totally inundated and smothering and killing the old forest. Another third of it is climbing up the hill. It's already there. It's infecting. And the last third is in the more pristine areas, in the areas where the rare plants are and the birds are. So for me, it's a question of emphasis. And I guess I feel like my hair was lit on fire when I read that EA. I wish I had been aware of it earlier, but I wasn't. And when you look at all of the problems that we've got taking care of our natural resources and all the reasons that we can't pay for it, all the reasons that we can't afford to do it. As I wrote in my testimony, as I dug into this thing, I've gotten really impressed with DLNR and DOFA over the years of being able to do some magic by doing as well as we have. But I'm saddened that we collectively have, I think, failed ourselves in these lower elevation areas. And I'll close by just mentioning, and I'm not a real tax guy, but I just noticed that in 1909, there was a conservation tax in Hawaii. So I'll just mention that.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Peter Simmons. Appreciate it very much. Appreciate your insights. We've received other written testimony. If they're here, they're certainly welcome to testify. Vanessa Stevens with SC Ranch. I don't see. Michelle Galimba from Kuahivi Ranch. Teresa Thompson from Thompson Ranch. Also Ulupono Initiative sent in written testimony. And finally, David Smith on behalf of DOFA submitted written testimony. I see you here, David. Did you want to describe anything about your written testimony at this time? The floor is yours if you'd like.
Okay, thank you. No, I just wanted to get some things on the record regarding the Kamehame Inouye land acquisition and the Balthazar lease. So there's just some supporting documentation there regarding the funds that were used to purchase that. And I see now that Mr. Balthazar is acknowledging that that probably is not a relative or a relevant parcel to be discussing under Act 90, because it was just purchased a year ago by the state and for forest reserve purposes, using funds for excuse me, forestry and endangered species restoration. So anyway, a lot of those were just relative to that lease. I just wanted to make that information available.
Great. Thank you very much, David. Appreciate that. And I would direct the working group members' attention to the written testimony from David Smith with that background information. So that is all the written testimony I have. Is there anyone else from the public here that would like to provide testimony who is online with us today? If so, unmute yourself, introduce yourself. If not, I don't see anyone doing that. So let's turn it back to the working group members for any questions of our testifiers or discussion. Vice Chair Bronco, Co-Chair Inouye, defer to you first if you've got any questions. Nope. Okay. Let me turn to Morris first to you. Any questions of our testifiers? Nope. All set. Chair Case, questions of our testifiers? Nope. Okay. And so what I'd like to do is commend all the testifiers who came today. And I appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know many of you have testified on this measure for years and years and years and years, and it's kind of exhausting, and I appreciate that. We have been, with this working group procedure, we've been trying to allow people to provide their input and give their mana'o, their resource documents, their suggestions, so we can figure out a collaborative solution. I want to highlight what Deputy Director Morris Atta said about collaborative working arrangements and how we actually make that happen. And I think it would be important in any legislation that we move forward that we figure out what can the legislature do to facilitate the active collaboration between DOA and DLNR, whether it's DLNR leases that stay in DLNR because of the multiple objectives that they need to achieve. How can Department of Agriculture assist DLNR in making sure that the agricultural operations on those DLNR leases actually have what the lease terms and conditions that they need. So I'd like to understand better what the legislature can do to help facilitate that collaborative working arrangement. The other thing I've learned too is that it's important for DLNR and DOA to work with the ranchers to increase other funding support through NRCS or other sources so that we can leverage our state lands and our lessees, RP holders and permittees to get those NRCS grants, et cetera. I've also learned that it is important for DLNR to have additional flexibility in their ways of leasing public lands, much like DOA has. But there's clearly, as Michelle Galimba brought up, there's a lack of trust of DLNR that there's a commitment for agricultural production as a priority. And we've heard from Chair Case numerous times that in fact, agriculture production is important to DLNR. But how do we actually build that kind of trust relationship is what our challenge is moving forward, and make sure that those lands that should be transferred because they're primarily ag producers should go to DOA. But if there's multiple purposes, how do we actually manage those lands properly? How do we do perhaps what Lonnie Petrie has suggested, using a decision-making tool to make those decisions in the best way? So those are just some thoughts that I've had that I've learned through this process. I would open it up to any other comments from other working group members. This is not definitive. We're not suggesting specific legislation, but just in the another few minutes we have left, if there's any comments this is a good time for doing that. Chair Inouye?
Yes, thank you. And thanks, Neil, for the history. But just let me share as well. Kamehameha Schools has been good to the constituents, and they've had a very excellent land management portfolio. History tells that it's totally different from how the state manages its lands. There have been no controversy in all the lifetime I've been here in government and being a local girl that you would hear Kamehameha Schools exiting any lessee from its lands. They worked well together. It's totally different from state operations. And I agree with Peter Simmons' comments. I totally agree that DLNR is just an example of good stewardship to forestry. They need funding. I agree. And they do best doing forestry if they have the tools to manage those lands and their programs. But when it comes to, I would think, and that's why Act 90 was created during my term in those years, working with all of those in agriculture as well. But that gives a clear example of what we're faced with in today's atmosphere. Carbon sequestration, global warming, and I believe that we should continue our forestry program, but we need to separate that. And that's the thought. I totally agree with what Peter says. And so having said that, we've come a long way getting ourselves educated. And it's just sometimes heartbreaking, to hear the impacts that I've heard back in the early 2000s when I managed agriculture as chair. So having said that, really appreciate all the work, and it just tells us that there's more to do. As a new chair for water and land, and my staff visiting all the agencies and the hard work that DLNR does, and it just tells us where are we heading for in the future of Hawaii, and that's a decision we all need to make. So forthcoming. I appreciate all the information that we've learned throughout these last months, and it's been grueling. I mean, we got lots of things, wildfires occurring. Just came back from our convention in Colorado Springs. I attended the wildfire. David, you did as well. We're faced with all the issues throughout our entire country. And so how do we manage that as well? So we got a lot of work to do. Appreciate the testimonies that we've heard through these last months, and see what happens. Again, mahalo and thanks, Neil, for coming out of retirement. Good to see you guys still active, but we've lost a lot of history with personalities as well. I'm happy that Peter is still around. We lost our Monty Richards with good support for the industry, forever. I miss him as well for background information and a good support base, but happy to know that there are still many out there who is supporting the industry and how Hawaii is to survive in the coming years. So thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Co-Chair. I appreciate those comments. Final comments from Chair Case and then Deputy Director Atta.
I don't think I could really add to what Chair Tarnas and Chair Inouye just said. It's a really good summary of the importance of all of these issues and the complexity of them. And I guess what I just would like to say is, you have our commitment to work in good faith with everyone on solutions here. That's what we are trying to do. And we believe that very strongly. And that's our commitment. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair Case. Appreciate that. Deputy Director Atta, you have the final word.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I can't agree more with Chair Case about what's been said, and I'm grateful for all the information and the viewpoints. Basically, I sense that everyone wants to come to the same or very similar, conclusion, which is a collaborative solution to all of these very important goals. And so I thank all of you for your contributions to this process. I really do appreciate that. And the department stands by, ready to do what it needs to do to make sure it works for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Director Atta. Thank you to all the members of the Act 90 Working Group for being here today to be part of this, to listen to the testifiers, have our discussion. So I appreciate all that. Okay, there being no further business before this working
just
group.
a reminder, Chair, just make sure that we receive all the information that was presented without printed documents produced.
Yes.
Yeah.
Co-chair is absolutely right. So those who did not submit anything in writing, please do submit it in writing so that we can have that part of the record and we can incorporate it not only into our records that are available on our working group website, but also make sure the minutes are accurate. So Mr. Hannes and Ms. Galimba, if you could, Ms. Galasse, if you could please make sure you send in your written testimony, that'd be great. Thank you.
Mine has been sent in.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Neil. Okay, there
Aloha.
being no further business before the working group today, our meeting is adjourned. Aloha, everyone.
Aloha.
Aloha.